Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a foundational legal battle in India's history. It's a case that really gets to the heart of a question every free society has to face.
I mean, think about it. Just how much power should the state have over your personal liberty? This wasn't just some abstract debate. It was the central question in one of the Indian Supreme Court's very first major tests, right after the nation's independence. And, the answer they came up with would echo for decades.
All right, let's set the scene. We're in 1950. India is a brand new republic and its constitution has just come into force. But this was a really turbulent time, right? There were all sorts of internal security issues and a lot of concern about communist movements.
So amidst all this tension, what does the government do? They passed something called the Preventive Detention Act. Now, this was a pretty heavy-duty law. It basically allowed the government to detain people without a trial. And who was one of the first to be arrested under it? A well-known communist leader, A.K. Gopalan.
But Gopalan wasn't just going to sit back and accept this. No way. He challenged his detention, taking his case all the way to the Supreme Court. He filed what's called a habeas corpus petition, which is a powerful legal move that basically says to the government, hey, you have to prove why you're legally holding me. His argument was simple but powerful. His detention, he claimed, was an illegal violation of the brand new fundamental rights he was promised in the Constitution.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Gopalan's challenge wasn't just about his own freedom. It forced the Supreme Court to wrestle with two huge constitutional questions, really setting up this epic debate between state power and individual liberty.
So the first big debate was all about the meaning of this one little phrase in Article 21, procedure established by law. What does that even mean? Gopalan's side argued it has to mean the procedure is just, fair, and reasonable. You can't just have an arbitrary process, even if Parliament passes a law saying so. But the state, they argued it just meant a procedure that was formally passed into law. They said the court shouldn't question if it's fair, only if it legally exists.
And the second question was just as critical. How should we even read our fundamental rights? Are they all connected like a giant safety net, or is each one in its own little box? Gopalan's lawyers argued they're interconnected. I mean, if you detain someone under Article 21, you're obviously restricting their freedom of movement under Article 19, right? They have to be read together. The state, on the other hand, pushed for this separate compartments idea. They said if a law is valid for detention, you don't need to worry about those other rights.
So you have these two totally clashing visions of freedom and law. The whole nation was watching, waiting for the Supreme Court to deliver its verdict. And this was a big deal. This decision was going to define the balance between the government's power and a citizen's liberty for decades. And the verdict? Well, the court sided with the state. In a majority decision, they dismissed Gopalan's petition. They upheld his detention, and in doing so, they took a really narrow and you could say restrictive view of what our fundamental rights actually mean.
Let's break down their reasoning. The court basically adopted all of the state's arguments. They said procedure established by law just means any procedure passed by a legislature, and we're not going to check if it's fair. They agreed that rights like freedom and liberty are in separate, mutually exclusive boxes. And they basically said that national security is a policy decision for Parliament, not for judges to second-guess.
But hold on, the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot. See, even in that 1950 decision, a couple of judges disagreed, and their dissenting opinions planted the seeds for a massive change that would come years down the road.
Yeah, these dissenting judges basically said, wait a minute, if a law is just plain absurd or unjust, the court has to step in. They worried that just a mechanical, literal interpretation could completely destroy the spirit of liberty that the Constitution was supposed to protect in the first place. And this is such a great illustration of how legal interpretation isn't static, it evolves. For 28 years, the Gopalan decision was the rule. It set this narrow, state-friendly precedent. But then, in 1978, a whole new case came along, Maneka Gandhi versus the Union of India. And this was the case that would fundamentally overturn everything.
The Maneka Gandhi case was a total game changer. It introduced this incredible new idea called the Golden Triangle. The court said that Articles 14, 19, and 21, that's equality, freedoms, and life and liberty, are all interconnected. They're not in separate compartments. They work together as a single, powerful shield. This meant any procedure that takes away your liberty now had to be not just legal, but also just, fair, and reasonable.
So, when we look at this whole journey, from Gopalan to Maneka, what we're seeing is a massive shift in how we understand our fundamental rights. It's a move away from a very literal, hands-off approach to something much more protective of the individual. I mean, just look at this shift. It's night and day, really. The idea of procedure went from being just a rubber stamp to a real test of fairness.
Fundamental rights went from being seen as these separate, isolated things to being an integrated system. And the court's own role changed. It was no longer just a referee checking the rules, but a guardian, making sure the game was actually fair.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, for one, it shows that constitutional interpretation isn't static. It absolutely evolves. The Gopalan case, you could say, was the Supreme Court's cautious, maybe even nervous first step. But the shift to the Maneka Gandhi doctrine, that was a huge leap forward, and it dramatically strengthened the rights of every Indian citizen. This whole evolution is basically a cornerstone of Indian constitutional law today.
And all this really leaves us with a final, lingering thought. As society keeps changing, you have to wonder, how will our definition of liberty evolve next? Because this constant push and pull between individual freedom and state security, that's a debate that's never really truly over.